Hey everybody, it's your friend John. You can call me the History Buff. I am going all day long reacting to the videos that you guys sent me, which means I'll probably get 3 done. I'm not sure what order you'll see them in, but hey, this one is Why Europe is Insanely Well Designed, was sent to me. I assume this is going to have to be about transportation from what I see. I'm pretty sure that's where we're going on this one. All right, well, let's see what happens. Come with me on the journey. Let's keep an open mind here.
This is a map of Europe's mass transit railway system across 33 countries. The yellow lines indicate the presence of a train line, and as you can see, it's very dense. There are hardly any spaces where there isn't any coverage for railways. Now, if we compare this to a map of railroad tracks in the US, it's a different story.
Of course, we're going to compare it to America. By the way, America, when this came out, this was a way to unite the country. I don't think Europe was as close-knit as America was. We were trying to bring, what is it? This the West Coast and the East Coast together, and then down here had to do with cattle ranching and things like that. It was going on before the Civil War, 1850, and into the 1860s. So we were laying down a lot of railroad. In that period, I think in Europe there were a lot more. It wasn't like there was no European Union. So anyway, let's keep going. Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
While parts of the US have some good mass transit, there are large areas of the country which isn't covered by Amtrak.
By the way, I should say that this is mostly freight that we're talking about, goods that are shipped from one side to the other. Like, they come in from China or, any of the Southeast Asian countries, and then it goes across to Chicago as a big hub. And then, Atlanta, Philadelphia, well, maybe not Atlanta, but Philadelphia, New York, Boston, that kind of thing. But to be honest with you, we drive a lot.
The nation's largest passenger railroad service. But let me show you another map, this time of high-speed rail in Europe. Now obviously, high-speed railways aren't going to be as common as regular speed railways, as they require excellent design, strict planning, and massive investment. And yet, as we can see, high-speed rail is present in Europe, which is a stark contrast to the US, as you can see from this map. While the US does have some higher speed rail, like the Aquila line in the Northeastern Corridor, it's hardly an effective map of transport solutions.
I will say there are some people that do take the train into the city, but people in Connecticut, they live in Connecticut, they work in the city. People all around Washington, you can take trains into Washington. Famously, Joe Biden, who is currently president while you're watching this of the United States, actually would go from, I believe it's the Wilmington, and take a train into Washington when he's been a senator for 40 some years. So he would take that in and out of the, from Washington and back daily, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, and you do what you can when you can, but to be honest with you, when you think about traveling like a long distance, you're really not talking trains. It doesn't come up as your top 3 ways of getting to a place.
And the Aquila line isn't really that fast either. It can reach about 150 miles per hour, but averages less than 70. This is not the case for Europe's insanely well-designed railroad system. And you have to remember that Europe's system accomplishes this while spanning 33 different nations in a very diverse continent. And I know what you're probably thinking. This is just because Europe is smaller than the United States, which simply isn't true. While the European Union is smaller than the US, continental Europe has an area that is about 1.04 times as much as the US.
I don't know about you guys, but when I think of Europe, I think of Russia too. I mean, at least the western half of Russia. I mean, it goes to the Ural Mountains, so I'm not sure why there's clarification there. Maybe because the rail lines didn't go into Russia proper. Or Belarus.
So we can dismiss this argument that the United States can't be that well designed because it's too big. Europe simply is better designed. But if you're American, you might not understand why railroad tracks or public transport as a whole is so important. I mean, driving a car works fine. right? Well, no, and Europe showcases why a primary focus on private transportation is so detrimental to a well-functioning transit system. Look at these maps. They show the US road network versus the EU's, and as you can see, the EU's road network is not nearly as impressive as the US's. And yet, when you look at some of the most congested cities in the world, European countries don't feature particularly prominently in the global rankings.
So I gotta be honest, I don't think it's, as an American, growing up here, I don't think it's all that complicated when it comes to driving. We do drive over anything else. Almost all of us have a car. If you don't have a car, you're in the city, and then it's public transportation. But sometimes public transportation is dangerous. Sometimes it's the only way to get around. But you're looking at a lot of different cities that pop up all over the place, and it's a very young history. So you have cities, almost everywhere, and then you have long areas of the Midwest and the mountainous regions and the prairies, and you'll have a city in the middle of nowhere, so you have a road just going straight out to it, and there is that. And on top of it, General Eisenhower, from World War II fame, when he became president, he realized the trouble with supplies in Europe. After the Normandy invasion, of course, and trying to get across into Germany, there were supply issues. You guys are probably history buffs yourselves, so you know about that. And one of the ways that he alleviated that was when he became president. He helped to found the interstate system. So we have these giant, fast, not Autobahn-like, but they are Autobahn-like actually, but not in terms of speed. You can go from one side of the country to another in like 3 days. So we could get invaded from the west, the north, the south, the east, and basically our military would have, in theory, no problem supplying a particular army. And also, once that was in, we were hook, line, and sinker, as we say. We were a car nation because he didn't make rail.
This is pretty shocking information because you'd assume that the country with a more expansive road network has a lot less congestion, especially considering the United States has devoted lots of time and money to their highways. So how come Europe is less congested when they have fewer roads? Well, it all comes down to disincentivizing the use of cars and, most importantly, making an attractive alternative. Europe does this by having both private and public transportation infrastructure, which technically the US has as well, it's just a lot worse. But on top of this, Europe makes it pretty expensive to buy, own, and use a car. This is achieved by having high taxes on vehicles and gasoline.
So yeah, in the States, we have and I'm sorry for this, but we did it. We made all sorts of weird deals. We keep petrol prices low. And that allows us to drive, which makes it more affordable that way. It's much more expensive for us to take a train somewhere, and it's very inefficient. So you guys pay a lot more for gas or for petrol if you're not in the States, and I'm sorry. But
in fact, here's a map of worldwide gasoline prices. As you can see, European nations are in the top rankings, while the US lies at the bottom, charging very little. But let me be very clear, it's only a good idea to make it expensive to drive a car if you have an attractive alternative, which America doesn't, but Europe does. I mean, obviously this wouldn't work in the US with its current transportation infrastructure, but in Europe, this is a great strategy because you make the roads less congested for those who actually need them and give everyone else an affordable and efficient alternative, being Europe's amazing public transport like the trains on the railways. This is arguably the better strategy because even though the vast majority of Americans have access to vehicles at around 91% and gas is comparatively cheap, it still leaves 9% who don't have access to vehicles. What are these people who can't afford a car supposed to do?
Whoa, but 9% he said don't have access necessarily. It doesn't mean they can't afford them. It's not that they're poor. I think every American will say you can have somebody that is extremely poor and they'll still have a car. It'd just be used I mean, you can get a car for $500 and it's a cash deal, and that's that. Keeping it up is another story, but it's the 9% are generally the people who are in the cities. New York City, not necessarily LA, but maybe Boston as well, even in Philly to a certain extent. And since New York City is the biggest city in America, if I'm not mistaken, it still is. That place you take an Uber or a Lyft ride share wherever, or you have a taxi, and then when you leave the city, you can actually take the train or whatever. But I have a friend of mine who actually went to New York City. She left her car back here, and so she didn't have a car in the city. She sold it after a while, and she didn't need it, and then she came back and had to get a car. So, but the bottom line is that you also can't get anywhere without a car. So you're almost you almost have to have one, and it annoys people if you have to constantly give somebody a ride. So the system sort of just takes over.
I mean, sometimes public transport isn't even an option or simply too expensive for many. So you've no
and dangerous too. I'll say that there are many places where it's very dangerous.
Actively excluded those who aren't exactly the most well off from society. To make matters worse, some US cities actually got rid of their public transport to make room for more cars. I'm not joking. American streetcars like trams were actually removed to make way for bigger roads. Absolutely insane.
Well, okay, to be fair, and I'm just being open-minded here, specifically that is San Francisco. I believe that's the picture of San Francisco. That was a very hilly area. It really wasn't conducive to streetcars, but it was tried in a lot of places. Otherwise, where there's a flat area and you need to work in another city, I would agree. I wouldn't know why they would remove that.
Compare that to Oslo, Berlin, and Madrid, where discussions are underway to restrict or even exclude most cars from the city center. And let's not forget that when you have cars, you also need somewhere to park them. And this is where things start to become rather ridiculous. You see, the United States has 2 billion parking spaces for 250 million cars.
Wow,
that's
I didn't know that.
8 parking spaces per vehicle. In Europe, it's pretty much a 1-to-1 with around 250 million public parking spaces for 300 million cars. But
just on a note here, we tend to build out, not up or in or reutilizing space that's already there. As a matter of fact, where I am, they're buying up farmland and they put in like retail, shops, or malls or things like that. And you need a place to park your car because it's the only way to get there. You can't walk because things are being built outward. And the other thing is that you can't even ride a bike. So I know that's a thing in I think it's like the Netherlands, and Belgium and certain other places, but it's not even, you can't even get there riding a bike. The closest place I have, if I need to buy a shirt, is for me, I would say 15 minutes away. Local drugstores, 10 minutes away. And there are hills everywhere. There's just no way you can get there with public transportation because we live outside of major cities. So everything is hilly. Developments are where people live. And it's hard to get anywhere. You just get in your car and go.
Emphasize the ridiculousness of this even further. The area that the US dedicates for car parking is actually larger than the area dedicated for housing people. It's honestly unbelievable that people are being squeezed out of American cities due to regulators wanting to make more room for parking spaces. This simply wouldn't fly in the EU, as it has.
Yeah, by the way, that's and I don't mean to talk about it from the American point of view, but that's what I know. It's actually a selling point for people to come to wherever you want them to go to, your commercial business or whatever, by saying, we don't have parking on the street, we have our own parking lot. It's I kind of think it's very gluttonous to say it that way, but it's important for people.
There's a whole policy dedicated to improving urban planning. See, the EU spent 115 billion euros between 2014 and 2020 to improve city design by making it smarter, greener, and more connected. simply meaning they allocated funds to make their cities more efficient, more connected, and better for the environment.
That makes
and better
sense.
for the environment they really are, as the average resident in a typical Western US city, such as Los Angeles or Phoenix, contributes approximately 6 times more carbon to the atmosphere per capita than an average European city resident. This is purely the result of not having effective transport solutions, which saves resources and allows people to move about efficiently. And exactly that. Moving about efficiently is something most of Europe's citizens are able to do as a result of the European Union. See, most of Europe's nations are in the European Union, which gives the EU citizens a number of perks, which includes a free travel area. This has been one of the most important achievements of the EU, as it makes it possible for an EU citizen to travel freely to other EU member states. And
I had no idea that if you were an EU member, you could travel for free. Now it makes total sense to me. Okay, I'm blown away. Like, you don't have to pay for it, or it's like you don't have to pay to cross a border. I mean, what would or I'll just keep watching and shut
stay
up.
for up to 3 months. All they need is a passport or even just an ID card. No visas, no trips to embassies, no form filing, just head straight over. This makes it incredibly easy to travel, study, and work in other countries and communities. And having this level of centralization is very important to good design, as it gives the smartest people the opportunity to work where they are most useful. And since good design obviously requires a lot of complicated problem solving and planning, this is very smart.
All right, I agree. And actually, I think it's where it says it's what insanely well designed. I think it actually works very well for Europe. So sort of like the basis is already there. Europe is, I hope, at the point where, no longer fighting countries. I hope. You kind of don't really have borders. You have borders, but they are what they are. But the union of it, I think, is fascinating, and it makes it work very well. And it's great for economies, just to go from one place to another. That's fantastic to get. If you have somebody in France that's very smart and they have a job in Germany because they're needed for their skills, it's easy for them to get there. In the United States, you have to actually sell your home and move to a new city if it's more than like an hour drive or a 30-minute drive. I don't know, say drive because we drive. But that's pretty cool. The free part, I love it.
Another smart thing is the incredible biking infrastructure we see in Europe, perfectly illustrated by this map of bike path density in Europe. All the purple lines are bike paths, and there's clearly a lot of them, especially towards the left side of the map, but that's just because this is the home of the Dutch, the Netherlands. Now, the funny thing is, I won't be able to compare this to a map of bike path density in the United States, because such a map hasn't been made. At least I wasn't able to find any, and I can only wonder why.
I'll tell you why. Because the reason that people would bike ride in the United States is if their car broke down. All right, just get that out of the way. But depending on what area you're in, you can't always. It will take you a long time to get to a certain place, and time is a very valuable commodity for Americans. I don't know how else to describe that. The other reason we would bike would be for fun. Now, we have bike trails, but they're in nature. And so people go to get exercise. They go out to get exercise. They go out to take a ride in the countryside where they're not in the city anymore, or, wherever. And it's sort of like a Sunday afternoon kind of thing, or I have a day off, I'm going to go for a bike ride. And in all honesty, what you do is you end up putting your bike in the back of your car, driving to the bike trail and biking. Now, I'm sure you guys do that too. And I'm speaking to more of the European audience, but it just shows you how dependent we are upon cars or automobiles.
But anyway, what Europe and also the European Union has achieved is pretty remarkable, as it's hard to think of another set of such diverse countries where you would be able to travel so freely, in an efficient and inexpensive manner. I mean, you can literally get from Paris to Amsterdam, for example, in just 3 hours for around $30. Imagine being able to travel all over
So you do have to pay. I guess. All right. So for 3 hours worth of travel for us in the States, it would be on an interstate highway. With our gas being as low as it is, for most cars, I would think it would probably be around, yeah, $25, $30 maybe. So it's about right. The only difference is, and maybe it's the control thing, like we're in control, but I don't know. But you have to take a car. It's just, you spend too much time trying to get a train or something.
Asia without any border crossings, checks, or visas, and being able to stay for months at a time. That would be truly amazing. And let's not forget that European design has always been distinctive and very successful. In fact, the continent's history of design and interconnectedness serves as a model for the rest of the world. But even though Europe and the EU are pretty great and have amazing infrastructure, they obviously aren't perfect. And I'd love to hear some of the reasons it might not be, so leave a comment down below if you have some thoughts on this.
All right, that's pretty much the end of the video right there. Yeah, so if you do have any thoughts, obviously in the comments, I love reading your comments. If I don't give it like a like or something like that, please know I've read the comments. I really have. I'm doing my best to keep up on them. And yeah, and if you have any questions about, you know, the US and how we do things, go ahead and ask it. But I have to admit, I really like the efficiency and the, basically, I guess it'd be the low carbon footprint of Europe. This makes a lot of sense to me. But it's just something that wouldn't work in the States. It wouldn't. I don't know how else to describe it. Maybe Americans can comment down below. All right, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe. I really would appreciate it if you would subscribe. That'd be great. Share it out. Like I said, comment, and I'll see you on the next video. Talk to you. Bye-bye.